It is 1 o'clock and we are here for our last Fun Day workshop. We are here with Kenzie Williamson with Brindle Tree Studios, and she's going to be showing us how to paint these super cute golden palominos, perfect for capturing that fall weather, those golden tones hitting the trees. So we're super excited to have you, Kenzie. So let's get right to it.
Hi everyone, I'm Kenzie. So this is the little guy that we're going to be painting today for the workshop. This is a little Darwin, and he is painted fully in hand-painted acrylics. So that's what we're going to be going over today. So hopefully you have a primed stablemate to start with. Sorry, we're having a little...
No, we're good. We're good.
Okay. Perfect. So the key to painting with your hand-painted acrylics and getting this nice smooth color is we want to have some sort of a wet palette so that we can keep our paints wet throughout the process, and you kind of almost float them across the horse rather than using them straight out of the bottle. They're really thick, you can get streaky and texture and all that kind of stuff that we don't want on a model. So I'm just going to turn the sound down on here so I can't hear myself.
And Kenzie, you're joining us from Washington right now. How are those fall foliage out there turning?
So we actually are having a really late start to fall, and I'm kind of bummed because this is my favorite time of year. Like, we're still in like the 75, 80 degrees. So it's more dead leaves than
way
fall.
Warmer than here.
Yeah. Are you still having hot weather out there?
It's been cold. It's been cold, but now we're starting to get back into it. But our leaves are turning here, so we're getting the nice fall.
I'm jealous. Yeah. Waiting for the rain and the fall colors to go to the pumpkin patch. So okay, so this is my wet palette that I like to use. This is by Red Grass Games. I just got this on Amazon. It's got like a little foam piece, and then it has like this like parchment paper, and you keep that wet, and that's where I'm going to mix my paints. But if you don't have that, you can make one really easily at home. This is a Tupperware, and you can put paper towels or a sponge in there, and you want to get that wet, and then you'll have the parchment paper down over the top. And then once this is all wet, then you can put your paints on top of that. And then in between sessions, you can close that up, and you can actually come back and reuse that for days, weeks, however long. You can just rehydrate it with some more water. So I'm going to be using my little palette today though. So there's 4 colors that I like to mix for my Palomino formula. A lot of times when I see Palominos, it's a hard color to capture. You can either go too yellow with it, too brown with it. And what I think a lot of people don't realize is that there's actually quite a bit of red in Palomino. It is a like red gene based horse. And then I also love to mix some iridescent gold because the shiny pigments in there kind of help to smooth out that color when you're putting it on your model. So I'm just going to mix up some paint. I like to wear gloves, but you don't have to.
And now, so do you have a recommendation for paint brands? Can they just be some acrylics that they can pick up at Michael's or any art store?
Yeah, the golden fluid acrylics are my favorite brand. You can find these at most like Michael's or craft stores. But honestly, like, you can still get decent results from the cheaper craft paints. It's just going to require a little bit more water. So the more expensive your paint of some of these like premium brands, that just means that there's more pigment in the paint, and then you have more binders in some of the cheaper acrylics. So you just kind of have to like weigh that, and it might just require a little bit more mixing, but you can get just as good of results. So I'm going to put all my colors here on the palette, and then we're going to mix this together. So I use quite a bit of white. And another thing to keep in mind, I've got my references up here on a screen in front of me. We want to be looking at real horse colors throughout the painting process. And with hand painted acrylics, we want to start out lighter than what our reference photo is going to be, because as you lay the layers down, they darken on top of each other. So the paint that I'm going to be making down on my palette is actually going to be lighter than my reference photo, because as we build up those layers, it's going to come out darker than we might have intended. And the red a little bit does go a long way. And then I'm going to use kind of a junkier, this is like a dollar store brush to mix this up. I can already tell I probably have a little bit more red than I want on here. I'm getting kind of like a peach hue, but we can keep adding color to kind of color match that and push it one direction or the other. So I'll probably add a little bit more white and a little bit more yellow, and then we'll start laying in our first layers.
So what color are you trying to kind of achieve here? You said it looks a little too peachy. Do you have something that our folks joining us at home, they can kind of guess for a color? Is it like a beige, a tan?
So it's hard because it's not a straight color out of the tube. You gotta like really just follow your reference photo. So I've got one up on a screen in front of me. So Palomino, it's not quite beige, it's not quite yellow, it's not tan. And so if you try to just take a yellow or a tan, something straight out of the tube as you're like going through the craft store and you're like, oh, this is close enough to Palomino, and then you put that on your horse and it just like never looks quite right. That's why we really want to play with mixing our colors and just kind of pushing that back and forth until we get closer to our reference. So you can have a picture printed out. That's really helpful to have it like next to your palette, and you can mix that and compare. And then once you put it on the horse, a lot of times it'll look much different from what you see on your palette to the horse. And the good thing is we're going to be doing a ton of layers to build up this color on your horse. So even if we're a little bit off to start, we're going to keep building that color and just keep pushing it around. So I like to keep the paint really fluid, really wet, and then we're going to paint it on the horse.
Kenzie, we have a question. Can you show us the reference photo that you are using?
Yes, let me see if I can. Okay, so it's up on my screen, and the color
we're tilted a little. If you can tilt, we're a little. If you can tilt it 1 or 90 degrees, where the horse's head is facing towards the ground on our screen, just so our viewers have a little bit easier time looking at it. There we go.
Yeah, so on this screen, it's going to look super orange. So that's why it's important to have the picture in front of you, because it's not going to be like super color correct. So there's a bunch of horses down here. And this is kind of more that golden tone that I'm going for. This horse does have dapples on this reference, but I'm not going to be doing that with hand painted acrylics. So, and then here's a traditional size that I'm working on. That one's in oils. So, but it's the same, it's pretty much the same color. Yeah. So you can see like I can get the same effect with hand painted acrylic as I can with oils. So wow. Like this technique.
And now, do you prefer, for your personal preference, do you prefer painting in oils or acrylics? Do you feel that you can get more detail with one versus the other?
It really depends on the size of the horse that I'm painting and the color of the horse that I'm painting. So for my lighter colors, where I don't have like a ton of contrast throughout the coat, so Palominos, Perlinos, a lot of like the cream based horses, and especially on like a smaller size model like a stablemate or a mini Winnie, I really like to use the hand painted acrylics. And then as I get into the larger sizes on traditional, I do prefer the oils. And especially for colors like bay, where I'm going to have a lot more colors and contrast in the coat, I do prefer the oils, but hand painted acrylics are great for this size. So I'm starting out, this is a filbert size 2. I usually start out with a size 1 or 2 filbert. And we're just going to start laying that color down, and it's going to start out streaky and patchy and not really what we're going for yet. But the key is just getting that base color down, and we're going to keep building it up. And acrylic is great because it's going to dry quickly. So by the time I move to the other side of the horse, this is going to be dry, and then we can keep coming in and laying another layer. So I can paint horses in acrylic much quicker than I can with oils because of course you don't have the drying time in between of these layers. So we get through this pretty fast.
And so when you're putting the paint on, is it thick? Is it thin? Is thinner better than thicker for this type of technique?
Thinner is better. If you have pretty like saturated wet paint, you can get away with a little bit thicker, a thicker layer. Because it's so wet, you're not going to have all that like texture that you would with the paint straight out of the bottle. So I can get away with a little bit thicker. And another thing you want to watch out for is if you're mixing with the brush that you're painting with, you can get bubbles on your paint. So if you're seeing those coming up on the horse, you just kind of want to poke them out with your brush as you go along.
And Kenzie, so I mean, I know your work. I'm sure many viewers know your work. So what got you into customizing briars?
So it was about 5 years ago. I bought my first horse as an adult. Like I had leased horses and done like 4-H and pony club and stuff growing up, but it was like my first horse, that was mine. And I had an old Breyer collection from when I was a kid, and I actually took one of the models out and I painted it to look like him.
Oh.
And then shortly after I painted that model, I was like, oh wow, there's other people out here doing this. And I discovered the NaMoPaimo group on Facebook. And that was just kind of a slippery slope into so many different kinds of painting techniques and joining the community. And it's really just kind of overtaken my life in a good way.
That's awesome. What's your favorite kind of scale to paint in? Do you like doing the traditionals, the classic size, stablemates?
It really depends on what I've painted recently. Like I love doing the traditionals because if you follow my work at all, you've seen I love to customize the big Breyer barns, and I love taking photos, like scenes in those barns. So like having the traditional size horses and being able to get in all that extra detail, I love doing that. But every time I paint a horse that big, I'm like, oh my gosh, they're so big. I can't wait to paint something small and quick. So I find that I like to paint stablemates in between painting the big guys.
Very cool. And we do have, for some of our viewers who might not know what the NaMoPaimo is, I definitely butchered that, so I apologize. There might be some viewers who are new to that, don't know what that is. Maybe you can give a quick rundown of what that is, so if they want to get into it too,
Yeah,
they
definitely
know how to get into that, what that is.
Yeah, so NaMoPaimo is National Model Horse Painting Month. It takes place in February. I believe this year it's transitioning into, the new name is going to be called like Model Horse Social Painting Month. So it's less of like a structured event, but it's still just like a great Facebook community to share painting ideas, and paint together, because this can be a pretty lonely activity. Like I spend a lot of time just like locked up in my studio at home. So it's great to have like that online community to share your painting process, and everybody's doing it together during the shortest month of the year. So depending on what size you're painting, 28 days can be hard to get a piece done.
How long does it typically take you to finish, say, a traditional in acrylics?
I have not painted a traditional in acrylic since that very first model that I painted of my first horse, Charlie. With oils, I can get one done in a month, but realistically, it's going to take me a few months.
Okay.
I usually have more than one horse going at one time. So yeah, once you break it down one way or another, it usually is 3 months or so. But these little guys, I love these because I can get these done in a weekend.
Yeah, it's a little bit less open-ended.
Yeah. So I've got my first layer down on this guy. You can see I started to leave his legs white. Another thing that I love about painting Palominos, and something that I like to do that kind of just sells the color a little bit more when you're painting in hand painted acrylics, is I really like to, you don't have a lot of contrast in the coat, so I really like to boost the contrast and the details. So I like high whites. I like a black muzzle with a contrast of like the pink nose on his markings. So I'm going to also do high white socks on this guy. And if you accidentally get some paint on his mane, that's totally fine. Because his mane and tail are not going to be pure white. If you're following your references, you can see it's more of a cream color. A lot of times they have yellow, even like gray or brown staining. So yeah, we'll go over that later in the details, but this first layer is almost dry, and because I'm keeping it so wet and acrylics blend pretty well, I'm just going to get going again with the second layer, and you can see it's already starting to cover all that like streakiness and blotchiness of the first layer, and so I can keep just dabbing it on there, and it's going to start filling him in pretty well.
And so is your goal with this to add the layers until you're happy with the color, till you reach kind of what your reference color looks like?
Yeah, so I'm just going to keep going until I have a nice, smooth, all over color. And he's already a little too peachy, a little too light. So once I put on this second color, he'll be a lot smoother. And then I'm going to adjust my color palette again. And once I put in that third layer over the top, the color is going to really start coming together.
And so for our viewers who are just joining, as a reminder, this is all going to be recorded and posted on breyerhorses.com. So if you missed a few of the first steps that Kenzie explained, you could go ahead and watch this. It'll be posted. So definitely take a look back at that so you can paint a whole herd of Palominos.
Yeah. It used to be a color I was really afraid of painting. I've always tended to paint more like bays and blacks and chestnuts, and the lighter colors have always kind of like scared me. But now that I've forced myself to paint more of them, it's a color I really enjoy.
What's your favorite color to paint if you had to choose? I know there's so many colors, variations of colors. If you only had to choose one to paint for the rest of your life, what color would that be?
Always bay.
Always bay.
Yeah, I love bays. There's such a wide range of colors that they can be, like between almost black to like blood red and all sorts of like ranges in between, and there's just so much contrast, and I find that they really pop in your photography, and I just love painting all the contrast. That's my favorite.
And you mentioned earlier that you've only been doing this for 5 years, which I think is absolutely impressive. Some of your work is stunning. Do you have any tips for some budding artists out there who might be just getting into this customizing world? With the Briars, and just any helpful tricks of the trade that they might be able to use to further their artistic ability.
Totally. I will share one of the best things I was ever told when I started out, by Nikki Button O'Neill, who I really look up to, and she has a completely different painting style than me. She paints in pastels, which I use in conjunction with my work, but not full pastel pieces like she does. But she told me just paint every day. And that's really what it comes down to, is this isn't talent. This is just practice. So even if you just pick up a horse like once a day or a few times a week, like your work will improve with every single horse. I didn't figure this out overnight. I just kept at it, and it's amazing how much you can improve with just daily practice. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that because you want to see good results quickly, but it really just comes down to practice. And if you love it enough and you just keep going, your work will get better all the time.
No, that is some great advice. And if they mess up, you just turn something, you might be thinking one, and if you mess up, you can just always turn it. The best thing about painting is you can always turn it into something new.
Totally. And if you ever mess up a horse too bad, you can always paint it black.
The easiest color to hide all the mistakes.
Yeah, especially if
there are some beautiful black horses out there.
Totally. And what makes a good black horse paint job is having like a bunch of different colors underneath. So if you mess up something really bad and then you turn it into a black horse, it's going to be beautiful because it's going to have all that color history underneath that's going to show through.
And how many layers do you usually put on your little guys here?
I'm pretty sure this guy, when I painted him, he probably ended up being around maybe 5 or 6 layers. So we're at two right here. You can see we've still got a ways to go with the color there. So I've got my second layer on. He's still a little bit wet, so I'm gonna put him to the side and let him dry a little bit, and then I'm going to adjust my color here a little bit more.
And now, so you adjust the color because you're trying to get it a little darker or lighter, or what's the theory behind changing the color palette a little bit there?
So I do need to go a little bit darker. It really helps, especially starting from white primer and building up to this light color. You don't want to go too dark too fast. That's where you're going to kind of get into more of like streaks and blotches and grain and all that sort of thing. So we want to build it up from a lighter color, but it's still not correct. Even if I were to keep going with more layers with what I have here on the palette, he's still not going to turn out like this guy. So I'm going to add a little bit more gold, a little bit more yellow, and maybe even just a hint more of red. And then within a couple layers, we'll be able to get a little bit closer to this guy.
And for some of our viewers who might have just joined and don't have a wet palette, you can easily make the wet palette with some damp paper towels and a shallow dish. Is that right?
Yep. So here's a Tupperware example that I made. So it's just paper towels in the bottom, parchment paper over the top. You want this to be wet enough that everything is saturated, but it's not soaking wet, because otherwise your paint is just going to go all over the place. So that works just as good as this, and it might actually even seal better than the one that I have, so that you can come back with your colors again the next day. That really helps to save a lot of your paint too.
It seems like, I mean, I'm doing it, I'm following along with you, and it seems like it's making it last longer, and a little bit goes a long way.
Totally. So you can see right here, I've got a much darker color and I'm kind of surrounded by that lighter color. And so I'm going to use that to my advantage here, because the color that I want is going to be somewhere in the middle of these two, but I don't want to fully mix it yet. So I'm just going to slowly mix it into each other. There we go. So if this was too wet, it would all just kind of blob together and I wouldn't really get to play with the gradient on my palette. So I'm going to keep it where it's at. And he's pretty much dry enough that I can start to get in my third layer. So I'm going to kind of go more towards the middle and see how that's going to look on him. And so yeah, it's a little bit too dark. You can see when I start to put a darker color over the top of that light base underneath, you're going to see more blotchiness and streakiness. And if you start to get too much of that, you can go back in with the lighter color that we used underneath and just kind of resurface your color.
And you mentioned earlier it's easier or better to start lighter, as you can always go darker.
Totally. Yeah, especially with the hand painted acrylics, once you start laying them over the top, even if you're using that same lighter color over and over, as they do build, they darken over the top of each other. So you want to be much lighter on your palette than even your reference photo shows. And it's much easier to go darker than try to backtrack light. So you just want to keep an eye on that.
And you mentioned that you have a horse. Do you still have that same horse? Do you still ride actively? How does interacting with the real horses kind of translate into your work with the Breyer horses?
So I don't have that same horse anymore. We did have to put him down pretty early in his life a couple years ago. So that was a really hard loss. But I do have 2 new ponies. I have a Welsh pony that I ride, and then a Shetland pony that's just like her buddy, her companion. So their names are Moon and Pop-Tart. Pop-Tart.
Oh my gosh,
The
Pop-Tart.
little Shetland pony. And I'm so lucky to have them at home with me. And so anytime I'm like painting during the day, I can go out and take a break. I can see how they move and what they look like in person. And like nothing beats a real horse in the flesh for your art references. So even if you don't have a horse of your own, I would encourage you to go to barns, go to events, go see horses in person, because there's just so much detail and nuances to color and musculature and times of the year and how that affects coat and so many other things that you can only really capture in person.
No, for sure. And I've seen that you've done a lot of finish work. Do you do any sculpting? Have you dabbled in that a little bit?
I have dabbled in sculpting. I wish that I was better at it. I find it really hard, but it's also a really welcome break from painting. I feel like sometimes if I'm feeling a little burnt out or worn down on painting, I love to kind of like switch gears in my brain and try out some more sculpting. So I've done some like re-sculpting on Briars. I haven't really finished many original sculptures because that's really hard, but I'll show you this guy. So this is the Cantering Warm Blood with a Salinero head, and then I did the mane and tail myself.
Very
So
cool.
some sculpting.
No, that's awesome. I mean, hey, you have to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, totally. And so it's like I have to remind myself, like, look at where you started with painting, and I can do the same with sculpting. I just got to put more work into it. So someday, someday I'll have some original sculptures of my own.
Well, you can work up to that.
Yeah, totally. So he's pretty wet right now with that third layer on. He's still pretty splotchy. Another thing that I really love to do with my finish work that I feel helps to know when I'm done with the body color is I actually like to paint my mane and tail pretty early on in the painting process, because it's amazing how much that can change your eye, to make sure that you're getting close to your body color. And that's actually something I learned from Mindy Berg's seminar at my first Briar Fest. That's something that she likes to do, and she's a color wizard. So what I'm going to do is to get that nice mane and tail color that's not quite white, is I'm going to take our body color and I'm going to mix that with white. So that really helps to like kind of tie in your mane and tail with your body together. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of white over here.
And do you recommend having like a second brush because to mix it, or if you use it with the same brush that you were mixing with?
I use just the same brush because we're pulling in the same colors. So I'm pretty messy with my paints and it all works out in the end.
So sometimes easier that way.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna mix in a little bit at a time. So yeah, that's dark white. If I were to just paint that onto my model, I mean, you can already see she's got that stark white mane and tail. It just doesn't look quite right. So we're gonna push a little bit more realism into her.
Tone it down a little bit.
Yeah. So, okay, we're getting there. I'm gonna go a little bit darker. And unlike the body, I actually do find it easier. You can go a little bit darker on the mane and tail and then add in some lighter highlights, because it doesn't really matter if the hair is streaky compared to like the smooth body. So now I'm going to take that lighter color and start painting the mane.
And you seem to paint a lot of briars. Do you have a specific mold that you like painting?
I would say my favorite mold right now is Troubadour. That was the model I used this year for my Briar Best Customs contest horse. I just love him. And it's funny, now I'm painting another Morgan. And I haven't even really been around Morgans that much. I'm not like a huge Morgan person, but they are beautiful.
Yeah, that sculpt is it's nice and big, has a lot of surface area to paint.
Totally. And then as far as stablemates go, I love the little Darwin that I painted for the promo. I love this guy by Laura Scalern, and I love Croy. Those are probably like my top 3 favorite stablemates. So I was trying to choose this morning, like, who am I going to paint? But I haven't painted one of these guys yet, so that's what I went for.
I don't know, I picked one that was easy to hold by the tail. I picked one with a lot of tail.
That's something that we don't always think about before we start painting them, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is really hard. Another thing that I do like to do for painting is when I'm painting the little guys is I have my like primer lids, and then this is some foam tape. And if I take this off, I can stick him on here.
Oh, that is genius.
Yeah. Sometimes he falls off, which is why I didn't put him on there this morning. But if you're careful and you have good tape, He's got like 2.5 hooves down, which is a little risky. It was easier with the Darwin because he has like the surface area on his tail and the 2 back legs. So
yeah, he has a little bit more support.
yeah, we'll see if this guy holds on. He might fall down into my paint palette, which is always fun to correct. And I can already tell this is a much darker mane and tail color than we're going for. But once I put some lighter white over the top, or more white in our mixture, that tail is going to look a lot more natural, and it's going to really help our color pop.
And adding the white underneath, it'll just bring out some highlights from the darker color. Right?
Totally, because our mane and tail, especially if you're looking at a real horse, it's not one solid color. So the more like colors we can add and gradients, the more realistic it's going to look. I'm trying to get his little forelock too.
And from painting all these different colors and styles, what, for you personally, what is the hardest color to paint for you?
It's always the lighter colors. So things like Perlino, Cremello, you don't have a lot of contrast, and it's really easy to accidentally get, I don't know, a blob of black or some dust, and you can just see everything show up on it. So it really is the lighter colors. You have to be like super diligent about keeping them clean, and you don't have the grace of a bunch of different layers and contrast to hide your mistakes. So always the lighter colors.
No, that makes sense. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, black, if you mess up with it, a lighter color, you can always turn it into a black horse.
Totally. But then I have friends that really enjoy the lighter colors because they feel like you don't need as many layers to get to the color you're going. So as long as you like stay really clean, which I'm not the best at, you can pull them off quicker. So I guess it's just up to personal
preference at that point.
Figure out what you're good at.
Well, I mean, personally, any horse in any color is beautiful to look at.
Totally. So now I'm waiting on that mane and tail to dry before I go in with another lighter shade, and I'm just going over my body color again. I think on my next layer, I'm going to add more gold, as I was trying to explain earlier, with the kind of metallic pigment that's in that paint. It really helps to smooth over the final color. I get that same like smoothing effect with like Pearlex loose pigments and some of the other colors that I paint. So I feel like adding this gold into this mixture really helps to smooth this out, especially for hand painted acrylics.
And when you started painting the Palominos, was it just kind of trial and error for the first few times, trying to get that right color?
Definitely. We had a lot of lemon ponies thing that probably never made it to Instagram.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with a bright yellow pony.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a lot of just trial and error and really following your reference. I've gotten a lot more confident with mixing colors in recent years after taking some of Heather Block's. She has some online oil painting workshops, and she comes from a traditional art background, so she's really like well versed in mixing colors. And so but there's also a lot of like great free tutorials online for learning how to mix paint, and I feel like that's one of like the biggest keys to painting horse colors, because you're never going to find that perfect color that you're looking for in your reference straight out of the tube. So the better that you can get training your eye and mixing paint on your palette, you'll start to be able to tackle some of these more difficult colors to pull off. Like black horses and bay horses are a little bit more forgiving because they come in so many different shades. So they can look really realistic, even if you're off from your reference, because you have such a wide range of true colors that they can be. Whereas like your brain instantly knows if something doesn't look truly Palomino or not.
And while we're working on the body, you mentioned that you left earlier that you left your legs bare to add in some markings. Or do you leave those white, or do you kind of follow the same concept with the mane and tail?
Right now I'm leaving them bare. I might in the next like coming layers start to add white over the top so I don't have such a stark line between the two, and start like blending those a little bit more depending on what color of Palomino you have. Looking at your references again, sometimes they don't have like a stark of like line on their markings. They kind of blend into the body a little bit more. So I'm going to play with that in coming layers, but there's really not a huge use in painting all the way down if I'm going to be adding white markings onto them anyway. So I'm just kind of leaving it bare for now. And then I'm going to add a little bit more white for my mane and tail, and I'm going to do another layer on that. So yeah, it's a lot of just like going back and forth, keeping your horse really wet and keeping your paints from like drying out, not using them straight out of the bottle. You're going to be able to mix it and get a much like smoother effect.
No, this wet palette. I've never even heard of painting with that. I am no painter by any means, but you know, I like to paint a stablemate every now and then.
Totally.
But I definitely like using the wet palette. It seems to help thin out the paints and keep them wet a little bit longer. They're easier to put on the horse.
Totally. It just kind of pushes all around and you're not getting chunky texture and streaks as much. You can just work with the paint a little bit easier.
So, Kenzie, do you use airbrushing techniques at all? We have a question from one of our viewers on YouTube. She was wondering, what techniques do you use to get the colors right?
So after I painted that first hand painted model, I thought that airbrushing was going to be the way to go for me. And I struggled with an airbrush for a couple of years. I think you can be good at any medium that you try if that's what you like and what works out for you. Like different artists can get great results, whether you're using hand painted acrylics or using an airbrush, you're only using pigments or using oils or using a combination of all of those things. It's really what you like. I found that I had a lot of like frustrations using airbrushes. You have to be really diligent at keeping them clean. They're really prone to clogging. And then you also have to have a pretty extensive like ventilation setup because you don't want to be breathing any of that in. So I really haven't used my airbrush in a couple of years. I typically, when I go to paint like a large horse in oils, I'm going to lay down a base coat in hand painted acrylics or pastel pigments or a combination of the two. And then I can just build up all the way to my final color in oils. And when I paint in oils, I don't mix them with anything toxic, so I can paint without a mask. Versus like if I'm using an airbrush, I have to have a full like ventilation mask. I have to be out in the garage. And that's just not a super relaxing, enjoyable painting experience for me.
You like to be able to sit down at your desk and not have to move for a few hours.
Yeah, totally. I love listening to audiobooks and podcasts and watching stupid TV shows, and that all gets drowned out with the sound of an airbrush, and then I have to fight them clogging for hours. So
No, that makes sense.
yeah, some people are great at it and really enjoy using them, but I always found it was more of a fight and a hassle than the results I was getting out of them.
You have to find the technique that works for you, right?
Totally. Yeah, so I added a lighter layer to his mane and tail, so that's already starting to kind of look a little bit closer to what we're going
Oh,
for.
yeah.
So yeah, he's getting there. He's getting along. The only other supply that I forgot to add on the list that is optional, on his muzzle and around his eyes and like the groin region, I did use a little bit of black hand pastel at the end. I just find I can blend that a lot better than I can with the hand painted acrylic, just to get that kind of like soft skin, the black skin around his face at the end. So that's just something that I add on at the end.
Well, the good thing is we can always update the supply sheet to reflect that. So if you're watching this video and hear that reference, just go check out the supply sheet after in a little bit, and that'll be updated for you guys so you can get the correct supplies.
Thank you.
Yeah, the wonders of technology, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I cannot believe we're almost coming up to the hour here.
Oh wow, it's gone by.
We could, I mean, I could sit here and paint all day.
Yeah.
But are there certain features that you want to show on the face, markings? That would be a great time to touch on for our viewers participating at home.
Totally. So what I'm gonna do to finish this guy, again, I'm just gonna continue building up the coat color. So it's probably gonna be like, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 more layers until I've got him to like this nice, smooth, all over color. And then I'm gonna really crisp up my mane and tail edges. And then I'm gonna start my markings and details. So I would put the pan pastel, I'll get out my little here, I'm just going to move my paint palette out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. So this is what the pan pastels look like. This one is like almost all the way gone, but it's just like a compressed black pigment. And then these are little like makeup applicator brushes, and you can just get a little bit of black on there. And then I would come in and following your reference, because I want to make sure we're not coming up too high with the black on his muzzle. So you can see it kind of follows the grooves of his nose and his lips and kind of dips down a little bit there. It's not going to come all the way up here. So I'm just going to dust that in. And in order to seal the pan pastel so that I can come in and work some acrylics over the top to kind of blend this muzzle in, I would have to go outside and seal him with a clear sealer. So my favorite is Mr. Super Clear or Tester's Dull Coat. Either one will work fine. And make sure you're wearing a proper mask. So I use this with the right cartridges on it for spraying sealer or primer. Can you see his muzzle there? So I've got the black dusted on there. And then I'm going to do the same around his eyes because they have a little bit of skin showing around the eyes too. And so I like to do this before I paint my eyes so that I have that skin showing through underneath. You can just kind of blow it off. And then other eye. And it's good that I'm doing this early on and before I finish the body color, because if I do get black somewhere where I don't want it, I can come back.
Cover it up.
Open it up, cover it up, yeah. So yeah, art is never perfect. You're always covering up all your mistakes, and only you will know that they are there.
And for our viewers who might not be familiar with the pan pastels, where can you pick those up at any art store? How do you use them?
I know that they carry them in person at Dick Blick Art Supplies. They're kind of hard to find at like your regular big box art stores, but they're really easy to find online. It's like $6 for one little round, and this will last you years. I use a ton of it, and it's hard to get through them. I think black is the only color that I've ever had to buy a second one of, like 5 years into this, so they last a long time. And then for my white markings, when I'm going to continue his legs and blaze, I'm going to use that same titanium white, and I'm actually going to add just a drop or two of the iridescent gold, and that helps to give a warmth to that white. So again, it's not a stark white on top of your body color. And that I learned from Mel Miller's white marking workshop that she did for Breyer, I think a year or two ago. I think it was maybe like a Breyer West like online workshop. So yeah, that was a great tip. I'm always adding on different things from artists. Like even if we don't paint the same way, I can always take away some little tidbit that I can add to my art. And like your style just ends up being like a combination of like everybody else that you've learned so many different things from along the way.
No, that's awesome. And then you can, you learn all these awesome techniques and you get to put your own spin on it.
Totally. It's like, even if I try to follow somebody's paint style exactly, it's always going to look different because it's you doing it.
And for anyone who's following at home, if you have any last minute questions, definitely get them in that chat on YouTube, or if you have any questions, you can always contact us and we'll get them to Kenzie, and we'll get those answers for you.
Definitely. And once I have this guy finished up, I will post him on my social media pages. So you can follow me at Bridle Tree Studios, BRIDLE Tree Studios. And so you'll get to see the final effect of this guy coming together.
And make sure if you're following along, post your own. We'd love to see it.
Yeah, I definitely want to see all the Palomino Stablemates. It used to be my favorite color of horses growing up because I loved Misty of Shincoteague. I just like dreamed about having a Palomino paint pony.
They are very pretty.
Yes. Hard to keep clean though. In painting.
That and white.
Yeah.
And so you did mention earlier that you were able to do some with pink muzzles. Would you just get like a little pink paint to then do that?
Oh.
Or
yeah, that's another thing I wanted to go over. Don't buy pink paint. Don't use horses' muzzles are not pink.
Glad I said that.
Yeah. So the best pink that you can make is just take this same white mixture that we're using for the mane and tail and just add a drop of your burnt sienna. And as we mix this up, you're gonna have a way more realistic pink. This is like pretty dark, but as we mix it in here, it's like here's a perfect muzzle pink right in here.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's a much like earthier brown, realistic pink than if I were to take like a flower petal pink and put it on a pony. That's not going to look super realistic. So
Yeah, no.
yeah, that's
That's
one
a
of my
really
greatest
good tip.
tips is just like you take your body color and that's integrated into my white marking, it's integrated into my mane and tail, it's integrated into the muzzle color, and it all just like complements each other and looks really realistic, just kind of getting messy with your paint and mixing it all together, and it really just like builds up into a more realistic color than just using stuff straight out of the tube and trying to keep it all separate.
Very nice. And so with our last 5 minutes we have of the hour, I cannot believe it's gone by so quick.
Yeah, it's flown
Do you
by.
have any final tips for any of our artists at home, how to finish their project? You have the floor.
Just like I said earlier, just like keep on painting, paint every day. Don't give up, don't get discouraged. None of my models that I started out with were show worthy, but that's okay. They all added up to become the horses that I paint today, and I know that the horses that I paint tomorrow are going to be even better. So you just gotta keep going. We all started somewhere.
No, for sure. Yeah, for sure. That is some great advice for a lot of our budding artists who I'm sure are tuning in to get, some tips and tricks.
Totally. That's one of the comments. Like I always appreciate it when I hear it because it always comes from like a sweet place, but I don't hate it. But when people say like, "Oh my gosh, you're so talented," I just want to be like, "No, I'm not. I promise." Like I just want to like shout from the rooftops. Like I worked so hard. I put in so many hours, so much practice, so many late nights. So you can do the same thing. It's all practice.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, that is some awesome advice. And so is there anything else that you want to anything that they need to know about finishing this project before we have to say goodbye, end our fun day? Any closing comments?
As far as like finishing, you just
Any
want to make
tips
sure
for the hooves?
Yeah, hooves are actually one of my I'm bummed that we didn't get to that because they're one of my favorite things to. I also work as a farrier as my other job, and so I'm like obsessed with hooves. I look at them all day, and so I really love painting them realistically. I actually on this guy used the same body color, and then I paint just the growth lines of the tubules with the burnt sienna mix, and then to make kind of like the growth line. So I'm doing burnt sienna down this way, and then I'm taking my white mixture and I'm starting from the top of the coronet and I'm going horizontal across the hoof. And I build that up in like 2 or 3 layers because as you go back and forth with lines down and lines horizontal, you start to get kind of like that shell effect of the hooves. So they're not just a flat color. And that helps to add a lot of detail to your piece and a lot of realism. And then I do have an eye tutorial on my page of how I painted these little eyes. A lot of people ask like, oh, do I paint with a cat whisker? Do I need a tiny brush to paint these little stablemate eyes? But it's not always the smallest brush that you have. It's looking at your brushes and trying to find the best tip. So for his eyes, I actually painted most of these in around 0, which is a pretty big brush compared to his eyeball, but it has a really good tip at the end. But it can hold more paint. So yeah, that's a little, you don't always need the smallest brush for painting all your small details.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Kenzie, thank you so much for joining us on our Briar National Fun Day. To all of our viewers at home, thank you for participating. We hope you had fun. We want to see all your awesome creations. Make sure you post them on Facebook or Instagram and tag us at #BriarFunDay. We want to see everything you made, and we hope you enjoyed the day, and we had so much fun with everyone. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a great
Bye.
day.